Welcome, everyone. We are so excited to have you all joining us for tonight's webinar on alternative grading methods. Before we get started, please take a moment to locate the chat icon at the bottom of your screen. Throughout the webinar, please put any questions or comments you have here. Kristian will be answering questions throughout the session as well as at the very end. You'll be receiving an email tomorrow with a recording as well as the presentation materials from tonight's webinar. Now, it is my pleasure to introduce our expert and teacher for this evening, Kristian Kuhn. Kristian comes to us with over 20 years of experience in the classroom, where he has worked with students all the way from ninth graders to English majors working on their graduate degrees. He is the moderator of the Facebook group Teachers Making Better Writers, where you can tap into a wealth of wisdom by connecting with a community of writing teachers. Kristian is also the owner of Teaching Teachers How to Teach Writing, where he offers several PD opportunities for individual teachers as well as districts. Kristian, thank you for being here tonight to share your knowledge. I'm sure everyone is on the edge of their seats, ready to hear how they can shake up their grading methods. Without further ado, I'm going to pass it off to Kristian.
Well, thank you everyone for coming. So as we know, probably the biggest bane of the English teacher's existence is the sheer amount of grading that we have to do. And I think that pretty much since the one-room schoolhouse, we've been following the exact same paradigm, the exact same protocol, in the sense that we assign an essay, student writes it, they submit it, and we begrudgingly avoid it for a couple of days, weeks, some of us, and then we devote some evenings and weekends to the task of squeezing as many comments as possible into the margins, and then we pass them back and nothing happens. There's not much growth or maturation in our student writing, and there's a number of reasons for this. And the big one is that it's an exercise in futility. 99% of the onus is placed on the teacher in the traditional grading paradigm. So if you think about it, what are we asking our students to do? At most, we're asking them to read our comments. And we know that many of them don't even do that. And if they do, what's it going to transfer into? What are they being tasked to do from those comments? So tonight, what I want to do is take some time to take a look at some alternatives that put the onus on the student more so than the teacher. That was one of the things I learned in my practicums with Ted Sizer was one of my mentor teachers, and he always said that if that onus was like 60-40, 60% teacher, 40% student, then that was optimal for learning. And literally, I think in traditional grading, I mean, we're doing the bulk of the work, and that's why it doesn't work all that well in many regards. So just a couple of things before we launch into the the meat and potatoes of what we're going to talk about, is that there's one caveat to alternative grading, and it's the idea that you have to equip your kids with a template, with a writing template. And I'm going to very quickly, kind of fly by night, show you the templates that I've developed over my 20-year career. And in future webinars and stuff, we can take a deep dive into those templates if you want. But it's really key that you have a common language with your students. And you'll see in a second here that there's a little bit of jargon, a little bit of lingo with my templates that give me like a uniform approach to have conversations with my students about their writing. So the impetus for my work stems from kind of a goofy question. And some of you may have seen my previous webinar with Perfection Learning that I did a couple months ago. And it's this question: what if we taught composition like Bob Ross teaches painting? And this drives my templates, and it kind of drives my philosophy as a composition instructor. Just imagine for an instance that, Bob Ross comes onto the screen and he says something closely akin to this. So, hello, happy little people. Today we're going to paint a beautiful New England autumnal landscape with beautiful fall foliage. And in the center of our canvas, we're going to include a New England wood-covered bridge, right? The cool thing about Bob Ross is that he gets up to that canvas and that easel and he proceeds to paint us through the process, right? So even like me, like I'm pretty inept when it comes to painting and drawing. I can closely approximate what he's doing through his models and exemplars. And there's a huge fundamental difference in composition in the teaching of writing between assigning and teaching. All too often, English teachers in particular will, I call it assigning, where we will give a kid a graphic organizer and say something like, you got a couple of class periods to complete the essay. On your mark, get set, go. And then that transference process from the graphic organizer to actual cogent, clear writing is absent. So I always tell teachers when I work with them, you are the expert in the classroom. Paint with your students. So what you're going to see me do in a second here is how I teach my students, in a manner that they dub me as the Bob Ross of composition. So paint with them, give plenty of exemplars and models. And then here's a little kicker about Bob Ross that not many people know about. He only ever used one template. He called it a heuristic, and it's called the wet on wet technique. Literally every single time the guy ever painted, he did the exact same thing. And it's true of my students. Whenever we're doing expository writing, so literary analysis, rhetorical analysis, argument, persuasion, synthesis, research, they're going to use my templates. They're universal, they're uniform, they can be used across the expository modes. So I know I have a very mixed audience here based on folks that have contacted me. I have some college professors, I have some middle school teachers, so a wide gamut. And as Dory said, I teach high school, but also college composition as well. And I typically introduce these templates at the 8th grade. And I chose, just for demonstration purposes tonight, to introduce the template with an essay that I would assign to 9th graders. So some of you, I think you all can get a general sense of how this would work. And I'm going to demonstrate synthesis, just do an argumentative synthesis paper, and then I would show you how I would grade all of these essays. So recently I was working with some 9th graders in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, and their teachers there. And we came up with this question: does SpongeBob SquarePants have any educational value for its intended age demographic? So the kids needed to watch a couple of episodes of SpongeBob, fun homework assignment. And then they had some research articles that they had to synthesize in order to support and defend their thesis. So that's that in a nutshell. So if we were to say, on your mark, get set, go, write to these kids, you'd get things like 11-sentence introductions, the 1-sentence introduction, the 1-block paragraph without a thesis statement. Like, we see that when we grade all the time. So the question immediately is this: how do I construct the introductory paragraph? What does that look like? So my template, I call it the declarative and the inverted thesis. And in a nutshell, it's this. So an introduction always is going to be 4 sentences long when you're using the templates. No more, no less. Always 4 sentences. Once kids get a certain alacrity with their writing and comfort level, kick the training wheels off. It's a scaffold. It's a guardrail. It's just, kick it off after you've got mastery. So when you declare, you're going to begin with the thesis. Just out of the gate, boom, drop the thesis, answer the essential question. From there, it's context and background. One of the things that I want to see my students have in their writing, I call it tier 2 level vocabulary, which is basically your average run-of-the-mill SAT level word, academic diction. And then something that some of you may be familiar with if you've followed my work is how I teach voice rhythm and flow, which is something that I grade. And I'll demonstrate that for you in just a second. So I espouse Strunk and White's idea that they write about in their text called Write It Right, where the idea that there's 12 different ways to wield a sentence. There's 12 different ways to construct one sentence. So even though these are young kids, ninth graders, you're going to see some sentence complexity. And then, as I said earlier, exactly 4 sentences. So you can flip it and do the inverted. And the only difference in this is that you might start with a hook or an analogy, context, background. And again, tier 2 sentence constructs, 4 sentences. So I'm going to show you a couple, and then we'll take a look at how we would actually grade all of these. So I got to move my picture off the screen here. So just take a look at how my students do this. SpongeBob SquarePants embodies the moral lessons that are crucial to a child's development. The show and its characters have a positive influence on today's youth. They encourage the values of hard work, amiability, and determination. These are values that we want at the foundational core of every child. Unquestionably, the animation is a perfect show for the appropriate age demographic. So you can see here, thesis comes last. It's inverted. They've answered the question. Context, background, sentence constructs, vocab, right? So now ultimately, we're going to talk about like how to grade these. The problem I see when I work with teachers is we're looking so globally at the student's work, we don't hone in on the specifics. So given that my students are supposed to be manipulating and exercising a template, there's certain things that I'm going to anticipate in their writing. So here's another one. Same kid manipulating my template. SpongeBob SquarePants promotes erratic and flawed behavior. Little white lies, wasting food, inappropriate movements, and being all around annoying is not role model behavior for children. Given what is offered as programming that targets young children, there are so many other options that are far less detrimental. If parents care about the well-being and moral development of their children, they should not allow their kids to view this program. And again, just straight up inverted thesis, context, background, sentence constructs, vocab. So every single time my students write synthesis or rhetorical analysis, persuasion, this is their approach. And I'll give you one last one here. SpongeBob's endless positivity and work ethic could not provide children with a better show to watch. So this kid's declaring. So it doesn't matter. Thesis up top, thesis at the bottom, context, background. SpongeBob implants realistic means of achieving success into young viewers' mind and provides them with a solid moral foundation built for success. While SpongeBob is fast-paced and intense, there's no scientific evidence that a television program can elicit, I should say, ADHD in a child. For our kids to learn valuable life lessons, this is one show parents can trust to advance their good parenting. Right. So that's how my students are going to be manipulating, the declarative and the inverted to get housed in a thesis statement, for the foundation of their essay. So if you think about it, I don't want to see textual support in there. I don't want to see my kids quoting. I don't want them, restating the prompt, none of that stuff that we often see them do in introductions. And then quickly, and I could spend a long time on this. This is kind of the nuts and bolts of my template. For the body paragraphs, I use something called the syllogistic method. And it's rooted in the Aristotelian tradition. And Aristotle ran a school called the Lyceum, and the rich aristocratic boys would go there to learn polemics and oration, debate. And you might be familiar, like maybe in college, or maybe even teach it, the book Plato's Republic, where the question, what is justice, is thrown out. And then all of the philosophical think tankers come to the mic and they drop their definition of justice. And Aristotle was no different than us in the sense that he was looking for line of reasoning. Right? When you debate or in polemics or in oration, your line of reasoning is very important. And he wanted to come up with a template. He called it a heuristic for cogent thinking. So cogent just means logical, mathematical, computative. And he advised his students to go syllogistically. And all that means is when you go from premise to conclusion. So if I were to say first premise, arsenic is deadly. Second premise, my dog ate arsenic. Conclusion, my dog is going to die. Like, it's logical, right? And oftentimes when students write, we know that they're all over the place. And ultimately when we're grading their logic. We're teaching them logic. So in terms of manipulating the syllogistic construct for the purposes of writing synthesis and argument, it looks like this. So it's the first premise is going to be an argument containing a why reason. The second premise is textual support. And the conclusion is your links and your echoes. So I always tell my students that the first premise is a promise. You kind of got to go back and shake hands with that. That's what sustains that line of reasoning. So I'm not going to read this whole thing to you because I'm just giving you sort of a general overview of it. But in terms of how the template how it functions, I always tell my students, and the College Board is big on this, that your argument is central. And you got to keep in mind, all expository writing is an active argument. So I tell my students, especially my youngins, like 9th graders, take 3 sentences to set up your argument. And the first premise is just a why reason. So the thesis answered the essential question, right? So in the topic sentences, you're answering why. Why did you say yes to the question, no, or why are you qualifying? So there are several reasons as to why parents should pull the plug on SpongeBob first, right? So you set up your reason. In the second premise, you want your support. So you're quoting, you're paraphrasing, and it all needs to be linked and germane, and connected up here. And then ultimately for body paragraphs, with my syllogistic body paragraphs, we're looking for 10 sentences. So sometimes I know that some of you in the audience will read paragraphs and you're like, why is my kid only writing 4-sentence paragraphs? There's not enough support and analysis in here. It doesn't go far enough, right? So we say that a full, girthy, juicy syllogistic paragraph shoots for 10 sentences. Cap it at 12. Otherwise, the kid's gonna break their line of reasoning and go on and bloviate too long. So that's a quick synopsis of the templates. And if you want me to do a deeper dive on that, then definitely invite me back for another webinar, and we can go into that with much depth. So, all right, you guys ready to get unburied? So how would I possibly grade all of these essays? And I'll give you a little secret of my day. So I teach AP Lang and AP Lit. I'm in New York State, so I have the 11th grade Regents, ELA, and I have creative writing and teach one college prep course. So it's AP test prep season, and we are on the block at my school, which means that we have 84-minute periods. My Lang kids came in today and they wrote 2 essays in 84 minutes. All right. My Lit kids came in and they did the same, because as you know, for the AP exam, you have to write 3 essays in under 2 hours. So we're preparing them for the marathon. Wholly insane amount of grading, right? Especially if I have to do it with traditional methods. So I want to show you how I can get through that bulk of paper without giving up my evenings and my weekends, but giving them meaningful feedback and commentary so that they can grow and mature as writers. So one, going back to Bob Ross, is called Grading Myself the Color of Bob Ross. And it's very clever how we do this. What I did was I went and bought my students a box of 25-cent crayons, right? At Walmart. You can get them at the dollar store for even less if you want to. You just need a couple of crayons. And this exercise will demonstrate for students what they are doing well, like the good, the bad, the ugly with regards to their writing, through the absence and the presence of color. So ultimately, we are going to color code every little nuance wrinkle of the template, all right, or what I am looking to evaluate. So what I did today after school, and I'm actually gonna do this tomorrow with my AP language students. We were doing the FRQ3, the overrated prompt from 2019. So this is how it's going to look. I've read all their essays already. I didn't make any comments on them whatsoever. On a notepad, I basically wrote down the grade I think it deserved based on the AP rubric, and that was it. That's all I did. So tomorrow when they come into class, we're going to do this exercise. So if you wrote a declarative thesis, underline it in red. If you wrote an inverted thesis, underline it in green. And you may be saying, well, that's a little odd. Why does that matter? Well, for literary analysis, you always invert the thesis with my template. For rhetorical analysis, you always declare the thesis. For synthesis, argument, persuasion, research, it's a 50-50 split. So what we're ultimately trying to gauge for the FRQ3 is trying to figure out, like, for just on student level, individual level, what are you better wielding, the declarative or the inverted? Students have a strong preference and like a proclivity for one over the other. So especially now where we're days away from taking the exam, kind of want them to see what they're doing. And what I do during this presentation, my writing workshop tomorrow, is I will actually show anonymous samples of student work. So I always remove their name. So we'll take a look at just a couple that I pull, and I just plug them into a PowerPoint, and we take a look at the fundamentals of the declarative and the inverted, and have conversations about which one is more suited for this particular prompt. Something that I really work on with my kids, especially at AP level, but I do it with the youngins as well, is that academic tone. So very big into voice, rhythm, and flow. I think it can be taught. And so with the AP kids tomorrow, one of the things I want to take a look at is their tier 2 level vocabulary. So with a purple crayon, I'm asking them to underline every tier 2 level word. And earlier I defined that. It's just basically your average run-of-the-mill SAT level word. Underline it in purple, right? So another thing that we do is teeter-totter balance the academic with the colloquial and the vernacular for voice. So in pink, I have them underline any colloquial expressions. And I know that you guys that are here, teaching the college classes and the AP classes, that makes sense. The younger kids, if you got a really good writer, set of writers, then you definitely can start talking about that sort of stuff. But they can see presence, absence of color, what is going on in their writing. Like, we don't need to be in the margins of their essays scribbling in all those comments and stuff, drawing their attention to it. They can illuminate themselves. So here's another one. Let's take a look at your rhythm and flow. As we know, overusing the short, simple declarative sentence impedes this from happening. Underline each short, simple declarative sentence in your essay in orange. So all of us that have graded essays for years, or even just like this is our first year teaching, one of the things that I know I have to break my students of, even my seniors, like my AP Lit students, and at the college level, a lot of my students early in the academic year, when they come to me, they go short, simple declarative sentence, followed by short, simple declarative sentence, followed by short, simple declarative sentence. So goes back to what we were talking about in the introductions. My students are really well versed in Strunk and White and the 12 sentence construct rules. They call it rule number 18. So I want to see manipulation within at the syntactical level for my students. So if they're seeing a lot of orange, that's problematic, because there's a purpose for the short, simple declarative sentence. And for my guys, it's when you're dropping your thesis or when you're really hammering your point in the conclusion of the syllogism. But if you got a lot of orange in your essay, you probably ain't going to have a lot of voice rhythm and flow going on in there. So that's something they look at. At the AP level, again, this is something we're looking at is passive voice construction. So I want them to, we've done a lot of work on avoiding to be verbs, and because we know it just yields a passive voice. So in black, I'm having them underline was, were, am, is, are, been, being, be, and are, which are your derivations of to be. And again, here's the kicker: it all correlates here. If the kid has very little purple, they're going to have a ton of black. If the kid has very little textual support, they're going to have a lot of black. And it all goes hand in hand. So they begin to see here how the little, compositional pieces along the lines of theory and technique interconnect. So even though we're using templates, and it drives me nuts, the AP kids, still, they want to submit essays that have 5-6 sentence paragraphs. I don't need to tell them anymore, hey guys, that's not enough support and analysis to really advance and defend a claim and to substantiate a thesis. So you're shooting for 10 to 12. So that's what that little thing does there. So we go through everything with this, let's skip to this one here. So like quote transitions. In the template, there's something called the 5-word rule. So I want my students to have very smooth conversational quote transition. So the rule is to place a minimum of 5 words in front of the quote, keep the quote small, and just run with it, bracket, and it should sound conversational. So before a quote, I have them underline the words that precede it in brown. And kids will catch themselves. They're like, oh, yeah, geez, man, I dropped a period at the end of my sentence. And then I immediately came with my dump truck and dropped a quote. And I'm like, can't do that. You can't do that. So this is the glory of this. I don't need to tell them this in the margins. Like they can teach themselves this. So we're looking at examples up on the overhead, going through things. They got their crayons and they can totally figure it out on their own. And you can even buddy system if the kid's confused. Like I noticed, like sometimes with the younger students, like 8th, 9th graders, their writing's too close to them. It's like looking at yourself too closely in the mirror. So buddy system works for this. Really shares the onus of responsibility, and students can begin to appraise and evaluate themselves, because oftentimes these grades that we give them and the comments we give them seem very arbitrary. So here's what I'm doing with my AP kids tomorrow, and this might sound a little insane. So on my notepad, I wrote down the grade I think they deserve. We're going to go through this whole process, and I'm going to ask them to do a couple of things. So based on how they color coded it, the absence and the presence of color, I'm going to say this to them. In 5 sentences, exactly 5 sentences, tell me the score you deserve, the grade you deserve, and why. They can figure it out. And here's the kicker. If we are within 5 points of each other, because we use grade 50 to 100 for our grade book. If we're within 5 points of each other, I'll give them the higher score. So let's say Jason said 88 and I say 91. I'll give Jason the 91 because we're within 5 points. Be amazed. We really do not have grade discrepancy, especially at this time of the year. We're all on the same page for the most part. You're going to run into grade grubbers. AP kids are probably the worst about that, but they tend to get good after you have a couple of conversations with them. And then the big thing that I do is this. At the end of the essay, I say, assign yourself 3 learning targets. What's 3 things you're going to work on in the next subsequent draft or essay or revision, and they're good. They submit all that back to me. I look at how they color coded it. I look at the comments they put in the margin, and we have conversation. That's the big thing. We don't converse with our students about writing it in the traditional grading paradigm. It's very one-sided. So we do 99.9% of the talk, right? What do they have to do? Read the comments, look at the grade. And I know on personal experience, some of my students do this, like, awesome, I love Mr. Kuhn, man. He gave me a 96. I love that dude. He's the best. He's the dude, and then other students are like, man, Mr. Kuhn's a jerk. I hate that guy. He gave me a 72. So like they internalize it and like take it really personal and don't see the good, the bad, the ugly with regards to their writing. That seems very arbitrary to them. So this puts onus and clarity on things. It's pretty cool. So here's another one that I'm going to do as well, especially with the AP students that are doing the 2 essays in 84 minutes. It's called 190, 80, 70 roulette. So I'm going to read all the essays, and let's just say, for example, that I do last year's FRQ1 from the lit exam, which is A's Man with the Saxophone. My guys were writing that the other day. I read them all on a notepad. I write down the grade I think the kid deserves, right? And from that stack, I'm going to take a paper that I would grade 100, remove the name, a 90, an 80, and I'll write the 70 because I never want to embarrass anybody. And it's always anonymous. And you'll realize after you do this, after a while, students typically will self-identify during the process. They want feedback, they want criticism, they want to hear from their peers, and they want to hear from me. So I'll just like plug them into a PowerPoint and we'll project them and go through it like this. So we read each draft and, well, hold on, let me just move this out of the way. My picture keeps dropping here. So what we'll do is compare the 100, the 90, the 80, and the 70 bit by bit through the template. So we start with the introduction, just like what we were looking at with those SpongeBobs. And there's gradations in terms of the quality of writing that separate a 90 from an 80, and an 80 from 100, and a 70 from 100. They're like just all sorts of theoretical, technical things at the compositional level that separate those papers. So as a class, we have a conversation after we look at the four introductions, just to start with, and say, all right, rank them. What's the 100, 90, 80, 70, and what divides them? Good, bad, ugly, like what's separating these? And then you can, break it down elementally by the template, but typically what I do starting with the introduction is this. I'll say, all right, we've looked at 4 introductions. In the margin of your paper, write down in like 3 sentences, what's your introduction look like? Is it looking like the 100, the 90, the 80, or the 70? But the big thing, and the kids have to answer this, you have to hold them accountable to this. Why? So why are you saying that you look like an 85? Right? What is going on in your writing that looks like that 85, in between the 90 and the 80? And again, you can do buddy systems, break it down bit by bit. So have them evaluate their first premises, have them evaluate their second premises, their quote transitions, their vocab, their to be verb usage, their sentence constructs, the voice, the rhythm, the flow, the nuance, the whole kit and caboodle. Like you're the Bob Ross of instruction there. So you break down and get them calibrated for that purpose. And with this one, I went back one, sorry about that. With this one, I also will have them do what we did with the previous. I'll say in exactly 5 sentences, tell me the grade you deserve and why, and be thorough, get to the why. So what's going on in your writing, and then in the end, 3 learning targets. What's 3 things you're gonna work on in the next paper? So that's a quick rundown of 100, 90, 80, 70. And again, if we're within 5 points of each other, I'll keep the higher grade and I will respond to them. So they'll write in their margin and I'll write back and boom. So you can see there, it's onus splitting, right? It's not all on me. And it's wonderful in the sense that kids will totally pick up what they are doing well, what they need to set as their own individual learning agenda as they continue to write across the expository modes or the FRQs. And it's really a way to demystify the writing process for the kids. And especially, if you couple your grading methodology with those templates, holy cow, you're going to have a classroom of writers on your hand in no time. And I'll share this just popped into my head. So my Lang kids were counting how many essays we've done this year. We write, and over the course of the academic year from September 7th, today's April 26th, we've done 31 essays. That's how much writing we do. And I have evenings and weekends, like I'm here tonight, right? So I have my evenings and weekends. I'm very busy, very active. I really do not take too much work home with me. I make it a point, like early in my career, I was like, what is this? This is nonsense. I was like, I didn't sign up for compulsory unpaid overtime. Like I have a, get to, the school day starts at 7:35 and I'm done at 2:50. Why am I still grading papers at 12:38 at night? Like this is nuts. So, and we do that to ourselves. The English teachers are insane doing that to ourselves. And it's because of the traditional grading method for the most part. So I'll share a few more and then we can open it up to questions. So some of you might be of my generation, my ilk, and remember this book series called Choose Your Own Adventure. Sometimes I do like to do traditional grading methods, but I don't want all that responsibility. I don't want 99.9% of the responsibility on my shoulders. Students need to have ownership on this. So with this one, I have them do something that looks like this. Set 3 learning or tell me 3 specific things that you want me to look for in your writing. And I will exclusively look at those 3 things. And if there's something like really egregious that's poking its head, then I'll alert the student to that. But it allows me to have a conversation with them about what they deem to be important. And it's in the language of learning targets is what that looks like in my classroom. So, a student might ask me to look at their quote selection, their quote transitions. A big thing that we're working on now is the why reason in the first premise. So students still, I got a couple that are really struggling and emerging, want to get into their textual support in their thesis statement in the introduction, and that's all got to be reserved for the first premise. So they tell me what they want to look at, what they want me to look at, and I'll look at it and I'll write them back. And it's always a conversation. So my students call it kind of like pen paling. So we're writing back and forth with each other often. And this one is another good one that I think some of you might really enjoy, and especially if you are doing AP classes in the test prep mode where you got to get through things quickly, right? So it's from The Price is Right, and you might remember that cliffhanger game. I borrowed something from Bob Barker here for this one. So in this, well, hold on, I'll back up and preface saying this. I've shown this to many teachers, and they're like, man, don't you have kids in like tears sometimes? Like my kids would be crying if if I were to do this with them. And I say, no, 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 no. So my kids are so accustomed to having their writing looked at by their peers. And from day one, we establish a community of writers. And we're not cruel, we're not vindictive, we're not petty. We're supportive of each other, but we're honest in our critique. And that's something I learned in developing this writing workshop model. So no glass jaws. No, I don't really get too many kids crying or tearing up on me. In this one, all the drafts are submitted to me in advance and I pre-read them. I remove their name. And what we do is this, it's actually pretty cool. So it's a whole class peer edit. And I've had a lot of conversations with teachers over the years, and they're just like, I hate peer editing. It doesn't work. Kids don't hold themselves accountable. They don't know what to look for. They're not very good at tearing apart each other's text. So this whole class model seems to do well because I can kind of guide them without monopolizing things. So let's say that we have paper number A, just student anonymous essay number A. I project it on the overhead. As a class, and my class sizes are anywhere from, our AP classes tend to be about 15 to 18, 19. We tend to keep those around there. Regents classes are about 25 to 28. And then our electives are smaller as well. So I know we all deal with different class sizes. So student paper number 1 is up on the overhead. As a class, we need to locate 3 things that are going well in the essay and 3 things that need to be worked on. And I give participation quotas. So depending on class size and how many essays, I might say, I need to hear from everybody 3 times today. So if you want, credit for being physically present here today in class, then I got to hear from you 3 times. So each paper is going to come away with 3 specific learning targets. And I'll show you the PowerPoint that we use for this. So this is what it actually looks like. I got it from Teachers Pay Teachers. It's 99 cents. And basically, as we have a split screen of the student essay and this, each time the draft is given a piece of feedback, we move the climber up until ultimately, boom, off the cliff into the seas of revision you go, right? 3 very concrete learning targets. So back up to what I said a little while ago, 2 essays in 84 minutes, right? So with my Lane guys, I have a class coming in tomorrow. I think we got about 14 kids in that class. We can get through every single one of their essays doing this, right? And I've read them. All I've done is I've read and I've written down kind of my general impression of it. And kids will have a very concrete sense of where they stand with regards to their writing, but it's collaborative. And I'm not the red ink hawk. I'm not scrawling endlessly into their margins. Doing all of that kind of stuff that the traditional paradigm does. And then one thing, and we'll see if there are any questions after this. Some teachers I work with, they're like, Kristian, I have to traditional grade. Sometimes you have to. And I'm like, I know, I agree. Like sometimes you like, if, for example, when I was doing rhetorical analysis with my Regents juniors for the very first time, I felt like I needed to take greater ownership of that because it was the first time they'd ever written rhetorical analysis before. And they faltered. It's tricky. It's a hard expository mode to wield. So here's the kicker though. If I'm going to traditionally grade an essay, I'm going to comment but my students will never see the grade. That's the kicker here, because they don't read and internalize our comments, right? Nothing happens in terms of them reading comments and then yielding growth and maturation as writers. It just doesn't happen. There's a disconnect there. So what I will do is this: I'll comment and I'll say, respond to my comments and tell me what grade you think you deserve and why in 5 sentences, and tell me 3 learning targets. And if we are within 5 points of each other, then we keep the higher grade. So I do that all the time with my students. So at this stage of the game, it's 8:15 here in Rochester, New York. Are there any questions that I can field? And then I can show you a couple last alternatives to wrap up the night.
Yeah, Kristian, there are 2 so far. So if anyone on the call has some questions that you'd like to add, just go ahead and put those in the chat. I'm going to go to the second one that was asked because you just mentioned it again. What do you do about a discrepancy if there's a difference of more than 5 points between your evaluation and the student's self-evaluation?
Oh, that's an excellent question. Yep. So early in the academic year, I had one student in particular. We always had a grade discrepancy, and it drove me nuts. AP language kid. AP kids sometimes can be a little too grade motivated, and he gave himself a 98, and I said 81. Way off, way off. So we have universal access period. It's called 5th block. It's basically just a study hall. The kids can go to any of their teachers for extra help. And I said, Sajad, I need to see it. We got to go over this. And we broke it down. And ultimately, it came down to this: a lot of pressure from home to have high grades. And Ashley told him today that probably one of the hardest working kids I've ever worked with in my life. He worked for his grades, and he finally is on his own, truthfully, without grade inflating or BSing or manipulating a rubric or anything, earning mid-90s on his essays. But I really had to hold him accountable. And it's just oftentimes kids come to me and they've never been told anything critical about their writing. And I don't know if you guys in the audience have experienced that before. And I know, in New York, we start after Labor Day. Our academic year begins in Labor Day. And in September, I get a lot of cry, a lot of tears and parent phone calls and stuff like that. Like, Emily was really upset by something you said to her with regards to her writing. And it's like, they call me Coach Kuhn sometimes, because I use this analogy. If I'm coaching them basketball and they double dribble or they throw the basket in the opponent's hoop, if we're in the championship game, I can't put them in the game, right? They're gonna cost us the game. So I'm like, I have a professional responsibility as a composition teacher to hold you accountable to the rules, So yeah, so if it's a big discrepancy, we definitely will sit down and go over it together and talk it through. And I just did this with, I have 2 sections of regions, junior regions, and that's 55 students. I had 1 grade discrepancy out of 55, and it was 8-point discrepancy, and we just talked about it. And I gave the kid the following assignment. I said, I graded it where I graded it because you have a lot of choppiness in your sentence constructs. So get into Strunk and White, do this exercise, go back, revise this 1 paragraph, and I will more than honor your score. So just kind of used it as a leverage to get them to revise and make it better.
Great.
So I hope that answered it.
I think so. There was a question early. The question is, do you explicitly teach tier 2 words? And this person said, I have a lot of struggling students. or do you create a handout for reference?
Yeah, I do something called Word Study Academy. We do it all year long. So I've been teaching 20 years, and I've noticed that students come to me a little bereft of words. They're not reading like the text rich things that they used to even 5 years ago. So there's a vocabulary kind of gap. So I do intensive word study with my students, and it's actually, it would be a fantastic webinar option to do with perfection learning. I could run that sometime. And then the big thing that I've been doing with my students, and kind of as an aside, apparently this got out into the world. I've created a vocabulary wordle that I do with my students, and it's basically modeled after Family Feud. So I do a lot of gamification with my students, and it's the idea that students know far more words than they think they know just by being in existence for 15, 16, 17 years. They've sponged words. But one of the things they don't do is exercise the pause when they write. So like me as a writer, I'll be writing, and I'll pause and say, what's the best word? What's the best tier 2 word? So it's a game that we do at the start of every class that takes us about 5 minutes, where they're learning words in context. So just as an example, I know this is like totally tangential. So today's sentence was, Ava took off her soiled sock and the stench was so, and they have to fill in the blank with the best tier 2 level word. And it's competitive and collaborative. So kids, they know these words. So like my kids on their own, just juniors, Regents kids said, putrid, rancid, pungent, vile, foul, so they have all these words, and it's a great like contextualization exercise to really fill in some of those voids. So that's one like little word strategy I do, but I have a whole like academy that I do for vocab.
Great. How does this method of grading work for longer papers?
For like research papers and stuff?
It's not specific, but I would assume research papers would qualify, yes.
Yep. That's another excellent question. So, for example, we have something called the capstone at our school. It's a graduation requirement. It's basically like your dissertation or your thesis that the seniors do. And I traditionally grade those because they're a culminating exercise. And those are, papers that, are like 8 to 10 pagers. So, big papers like that, which my guys don't do too many of during the academic year. We do a lot of straight like 4-paragraph, 5-paragraph, 2-3 pagers. That's the bulk of what we do. So I don't run big papers through alternative grading methods. But if I were to, if I were to do that capstone, something like the choose your own adventure would work. For drafting processes of those larger papers, we definitely do a lot of alternative grading methods with it. But final drafts, I do a traditional grading approach with it.
We have a lot of questions coming in. So I want to get to as many as we can. Can you quickly explain about sentence constructs?
Yep. So Strunk and White have this book called Write It Right. And in it, I'm 47 years old, grew up in New York State. And in the old days, in the 90s, the English teachers would hurl the elements of style at you, and you had to know that down. And I'm kind of old school with my kids. I want mastery of punctuation, grammar, syntax. I'm a stickler on that. So I do a lot of gamification of those things, and you can check out some of that stuff in my YouTube channel, and I would love to do a webinar on that. So rule number 18 is this, according to Strunk and White. So they take one loose, they call it a loose sentence, independent clause, bam, slap it down, and they demonstrate for students how to rewrite that one sentence 11 different ways. So their assertion is that there's 12 different ways to manipulate the syntax of a single sentence. So my students would be able to, like, they know the names of sentence constructs, if they've done their homework and like gave me an iota of effort this year. So they will know like what a parenthetical statement is, an independent clause, an adjective clause. I'm able to talk at that level with my kids. And even like I have been doing this Zoom teaching with this group of ninth graders from Pittsburgh. We have their ninth grade students using this language as well. I think it's very pertinent, very germane to just understanding basic composition to have that language. It's kind of like if you're learning music, it's best to know the theory and the technique behind it. You can become a much more advanced musician. And the same goes for composition. So I'm a little odd in that regard. I really like my kids to be disciplined with that kind of stuff.
Great. Let's see. Someone wanted to know, can you clarify what makes the mountain climber move up the mountain?
Let me see if I go back. I don't know if this will actually work or not. Let me see if I hit climb. No, it didn't. So basically you just click the mouse. Like, so let's say, for example, I have a student by the name of Jason in class, and we're looking at essay number 1, anonymous essay number 1. And Jason says, in this essay, I see that the very first 3 sentences parallel each other. You have 3 back-to-back-to-back short, simple declarative sentences. It's impeding your voice rhythm and flow. Click. Then maybe Hallie will say, yes, but I see that the quote transitions are really silky smooth. I like that. The quote, that's a really nice element. And then Katrina might say something like, yes, in the conclusion of the syllogism, it's too abrupt. You broke your line of reasoning. You need to say this in order to. So the students are commenting on the draft that's projected. My goal, especially at this stage of the year, is to stay out as much as possible. And my kids are really, really, really well versed at this stage of the year and can facilitate and run the writing workshops pretty much on their own. So ultimately, and you can do it any way you want. We usually do say 3 complementary things and then 3 critical things, and then over the cliff you go into revision. So the climber gets 6 clicks, and then on the 6th one he goes over the cliff. And so I hope I explained that well enough.
I hope so too. One more question, because I see we're almost at time. Do you have any type of grading rubric for these alternative grading methods, and would you be willing to share it?
I predominantly teach AP, Lang and Lit, so I strictly adhere to those rubrics. And then the district that I'm at, we're in New York, and I have the Regents students, so we have the Regents rubrics. And if it's a non-Regents assignment, then my department has district rubrics that we make for our prescribed curriculum that we have. So that's what we use for these.
Okay, great. Do you want to take one more
question?
Yeah,
sure, fire away.
Let's do one more. Let's see. Do you also then grade their 5-sentence assessments of their writing as a separate grade? And if so, how?
I never have, but I probably could. So, yeah, I never have. But that'd be very interesting to do that.
Great, great. Yeah, there's a lot of interesting questions here. I wish we had more time to get to those, but just really appreciate everything that you shared with us today. So let me just throw up on the screen here. I'm going to share my screen. Let me present.
Yeah, I stopped sharing mine,
Oh,
so you
yes, I
should
see
be good.
that. Yep.
Yep, yep.
I need to share my screen. I just was looking at that. Where did it go? Oh, there it is. It's in green. Okay, here we go. So I wanted to thank Kristian for his time and insights this evening. I'm sure everyone is ready to start implementing some of your great tactics and brainstorming up some new ideas. As a reminder to all participants, we will send out an email tomorrow with the recording of tonight's webinar, as well as the presentation materials. If you're a current user of Perfection Learning programs, or in the future, we are excited to announce our professional development services. We want all educators to be successful using the programs we have developed. If you're interested in virtual or job embedded services, please reach out to our professional development team at the email on the screen, which is professionaldevelopment@perfectionlearning.com. If you want to learn more from Kristian, please take time to subscribe to the Next Step blog from Perfection Learning at nextstep.perfectionlearning.com. There you'll find recordings of Kristian's past webinars, blog posts, and lesson plans for him, as well as other authors and experts. And please be sure to complete the 1-question survey at this link. Oh, I just clicked out of it. I don't want to do that. Sorry about that. Let me present again. You can either use this QR code. It's a one-question survey, and we'll throw the Survey Monkey link in the chat as well. And go ahead and take that survey. We want to be able to make sure that we cover topics that are of interest to all of you. So if you just hang on 1 second, I will put this link in the chat. And with that, we will say good night to everyone. We really do appreciate you participating. I'm going to throw this in the chat, and you can click on that for, you can take the survey there. Okay. Thanks so much for participating. Thank you, Kristian.
You're very welcome.